newfound independence of moving out of my parents' house was exhilarating. The modest house on the quiet suburban street was where I could finally chart my course. Still, as time passed, that excitement would gradually become a bone-chilling ordeal. The initial days were filled with a sense of accomplishment, unpacking, and the thrill of personal space. It was my sanctuary, a canvas for my life. But soon, subtle disturbances crept in, unexplained events that unraveled the sense of security. Objects appeared subtly out of place. A chair shifted from where I'd left it. My laptop mysteriously opened to a web page I hadn't visited. The unease grew more palpable with each passing day. I began to sense an ever-present gaze, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. I started to feel the weight of being observed, an uncomfortable awareness that refused to let go. My personal belongings began vanishing one by one, starting with minor items like socks, and then escalating to more intimate possessions like family photographs. I was losing fragments of my life, and the culprit remained elusive. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I gazed out of my window at the house next door. Mr. Johnson, my elderly neighbor, stood behind his curtain, his gaze penetrating mine. His eyes, obscured by thick glasses that seemed to magnify his presence, bore into my soul. It was as if he were studying my every move, cataloging my existence with relentless scrutiny. I tried to dismiss it, hoping my imagination was running wild. Still, it soon became apparent that Mr. Johnson was more than just an inquisitive neighbor. He was a relentless observer, an uninvited guest who had occupied my psyche. The feeling of being watched persisted even within the confines of my home. There was no escape, no reprieve from the constant vigilance. It was like the walls had eyes and I was a captive in my nightmare. One evening, fueled by paranoia and the growing sense of intrusion, I decided to investigate. The basement beckoned an eerie place that had always given me the creeps. As I descended the creaky stairs, I stumbled upon a horrifying discovery. There, concealed behind a stack of dusty books, lay a sophisticated surveillance camera aimed directly at my living space. Fear surged through me, a paralyzing realization that my life was under someone else's control. I yanked the camera free, examining it for any identifying marks. Still, it was a professional piece of equipment, far beyond the capabilities of an ordinary stalker. With trembling hands, I knew I had to confront Mr. Johnson. I knocked on his door, hoping for an explanation, but he feigned innocence, his eyes belying the cunning behind his facade. He attempted to manipulate the conversation, making me question my own sanity. It was a chilling experience, a psychological battle I was ill-prepared to wage, but the sensation of being watched persisted, relentless and invasive. It felt as though I was trapped in a nightmarish surveillance state. Seeking help, I contacted the police, who promised to investigate the matter. It was a small glimmer of hope in a rapidly darkening situation. That night, I lay in bed, my mind tormented by the sinister reality unfolding in my life. The following morning, a detective called, his voice heavy with concern. The surveillance camera contained a trove of images, not only of me, but also of other individuals. The photos were snapshots of everyday life, moments meant to be kept private. As I scrolled through the images, a chilling revelation emerged. Mr. Johnson was not just my watcher, he had been spying on multiple victims, each of us unaware of the invasive intrusion into our lives. The police uncovered a concealed chamber in his house, filled with monitors, computers, and files detailing his unsuspecting victims. The horror of the situation was beyond comprehension. Mr. Johnson had been invading our lives, stealing and sharing our most intimate moments online. Our vulnerabilities had been exploited for his sadistic amusement. News of the watcher next door sent shockwaves through the community. The violation of privacy left us all scarred, the once solid sense of security shattered. Mr. Johnson was arrested and faced many charges, but the damage was already done. I left that house behind but could never escape the feeling of being watched. The surveillance had ceased, yet the notion that our private lives had been exposed to the world haunted me. The watcher next door had torn away the illusion of safety a home should provide, leaving me forever wary of the shadows lurking just beyond my window. It was a lesson etched into my soul, a nightmare I could never entirely escape. The decision to move from our old home and buy a new one was meant to be the fresh start we'd always longed for. The Suburban House was a charming relic of another era, with its polished wooden floors, vintage fireplace, and a room meant to be our sanctuary. However, that room held a secret that would unravel the fabric of our reality. The initial days in the new house were blissful, with dreams of our future together. We unpacked our belongings, painted the walls, and embraced the promise of a new life. But it didn't take long for peculiarities to emerge. Whispers in the dark, distant cries that left an unsettling chill in the air. One night, as we settled into our bedroom, my wife noticed it first, a faint draft that sent a shiver down her spine. She reached out, pressing her hand against the wall, and her fingertips brushed something concealed, a seam that wasn't meant to be there. Curiosity got the better of us. We examined the wall closely, and it wasn't long before we discovered a hidden latch, cleverly camouflaged in the vintage wallpaper. The latch released a secret door, revealing a narrow, dimly lit chamber beyond. The sight that met our eyes was a ghastly one. The emaciated and hollow-eyed woman sat huddled in a corner, her hair matted and her skin ashen. She was wearing tattered, blood-stained clothes. Her appearance was haunting, and she trembled at our presence. My wife and I exchanged horrified glances, unsure of what we had stumbled upon. It was clear that the woman had been imprisoned there, but by whom and for how long? As our voices cracked with fear and shock, we asked her name. Her response was barely audible, as if she had forgotten how to speak. "Eliza," she whispered, her voice quivering. We had to act quickly. We helped Eliza out of her prison, and as she emerged into the light, we saw the depth of her suffering. She was frail and disoriented, a relic of torment that had endured unimaginable horrors. As she regained some strength, her story began to unravel. Eliza told us that the house's previous owner, Dr. Elias Montague, had subjected her to cruel and inhumane experiments. She had been a captive for years, enduring unspeakable pain and suffering. Dr. Montague, a twisted scientist with a penchant for the macabre, had lured vulnerable individuals into his home, promising them refuge and shelter. Instead, he used them as subjects in gruesome experiments that defied all ethical boundaries. My wife and I were horrified, guilt washing over us for not having discovered the hidden room sooner. We vowed to help Eliza and ensure Dr. Montague faced justice for his malevolent acts. The process was challenging. Eliza required extensive medical and psychological support to rebuild her life. But her strength and resilience were unwavering. In time, she began to heal, her voice regaining its former strength and her haunted eyes filling with hope. Together, we faced the daunting task of bringing Dr. Montague to justice. The horrors he had inflicted upon Elisa were innumerable. As we delved deeper into his past, we discovered a sinister legacy of cruelty and depravity. The legal proceedings were grueling, but they were essential. Dr. Montague was arrested, tried and sentenced to a lifetime of imprisonment for his heinous crimes. The horrors within its walls forever tainted the house, and we could never look at it the same way again. Eliza, with our support, found solace and recovery. The room that had once been her prison was transformed into a place of healing, symbolizing her resilience in the face of unspeakable darkness. Our new home, which had initially seemed like a dream come true, became a place marked by the horrors that had unfolded within its hidden corners. The past could not be erased, but we hoped to create a future filled with healing and redemption. And as Eliza's strength grew, we realized that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit could endure, rebuild, and find a path toward the light. Life as a working mother was a relentless juggling act. With its quaint facade and picket fence, the new house was meant to be a fresh start, a place where I could provide for my baby while building a stable life. The demands of my job meant I couldn't always be there for my child, but I was determined to give her the best life I could. My neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, seemed like a godsend. Her home was just next door, and we quickly became friends. She was kind, and her offer to watch my baby while I was at work was a lifeline I couldn't refuse. Mrs. Reynolds had been a mother herself, and her experience gave me a sense of reassurance. My daughter, Emily, was a cheerful and curious child, and I was confident she'd be in good hands. Little did I know that Mrs. Reynolds' seemingly benevolent intentions hid a sinister obsession. In the beginning, everything appeared perfectly normal. Emily would spend her days with Mrs. Reynolds, and I would return home from work to find her content and cared for. But over time, the subtle shifts in Mrs. Reynolds' behavior began manifesting, and her obsession with my daughter turned dark. I noticed she grew possessive, always seeking to spend more time with Emily. At first, I dismissed it as a harmless attachment, the bond between a doting babysitter and a child, but the intensity of Mrs. Reynolds' fixation was undeniable. She became adamant that Emily was better off with her, and she began to isolate herself from me, restricting our time together. One evening, as I returned from work, I found my daughter asleep in Mrs. Reynolds' arms. Emily's room was filled with toys and gifts, all courtesy of my neighbor. She was trying to create an alternate world where she and Emily were the only inhabitants. As I prepared to leave for work the following day, Mrs. Reynolds showed up at my doorstep with a chilling proposition. She suggested that I relinquish custody of Emily to her, asserting that I was an unfit mother and that she could provide a superior life for my child. Her words were coated with a saccharine smile, but the malice in her eyes was unmistakable. Panic surged through me as I realized the extent of Mrs. Reynolds' obsession. I couldn't bear losing my daughter, the light of my life, to this woman's sinister ambitions. It was clear that I needed to act swiftly to protect Emily from the clutches of her deranged neighbor. As the days passed, I became more vigilant, watching Mrs. Reynolds like a hawk. The nights were the worst. I could swear I heard strange noises and whispers from the wind. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of Mrs. Reynolds outside our window, staring intently at Emily and me. Her obsession had taken a horrifying new turn, and I knew I had to act decisively. I contacted a trusted friend and confidant who worked in law enforcement. We planned to expose Mrs. Reynolds' unhealthy fixation and safeguard my child. It was a grueling process, fraught with anxiety and fear, but it was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. With my friend's assistance, we gathered evidence of Mrs. Reynolds' increasingly erratic behavior. We installed security cameras around the house to capture her trespassing at night, and the strange symbols she painted on our front door, evidence of her growing obsession. The legal system swung into action as the truth of Mrs. Reynolds' sinister obsession was unveiled. The court granted me full custody of Emily, and her neighbor's sinister plot was exposed to the world. Mrs. Reynolds was arrested, her nefarious intent laid bare for all to see. Emily and I moved forward, but the scars of the ordeal ran deep. The new house, meant to be a haven, had become a place of horror, forever tainted by the darkness that had threatened to engulf our lives. Ultimately, the strength of a mother's love and determination prevailed, protecting Emily from the clutches of a neighbor whose obsession had nearly stolen her from me. It was a harrowing journey that reinforced the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child, even in the face of unimaginable evil. The house, however, held its own sinister secrets as whispers of its history began to echo through the walls, a chilling reminder of the darkness we had narrowly escaped.
Thank you for watching. If you want to support our channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe and like button.